My name is Rachel. I'm 36, and I've stopped pretending that silence from my in laws is anything but deliberate. This year, my daughter Sophie made her own Christmas ornament, stitched it by hand, wrapped it in tissue, and brought it hoping they'd hang it next to her cousins. It never even left her backpack. 10 years into this marriage, I've learned that Margaret Bennett's version of love comes prepackaged, coordinated, curated, and cruel in the quietest ways. Last year, she cropped Sophie's name out of the family card. The year before, she forgot to set a seat for her at the kids' table. But this time, as Sophie waded through a glittering gift exchange and her name was never called, I didn't bite my tongue. Ethan didn't either. He reached into his coat and pulled out a white envelope, one that shattered every illusion they'd spent decades building. If you've ever watched your child wonder if they matter, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Tap like and stay with me, because that envelope didn't just carry documents. It carried our freedom. This year, Sophie made her own Christmas ornament, hoping it'd be hung next to her cousins. It never even left her backpack. The scent of cinnamon oats lingered in the air as Rachel tightened Sophie's scarf, tucking a stray blonde curl behind her daughter's ear. Snow drifted gently beyond the frosted kitchen window, muffling the world in a hush that felt too calm for the tight knot in Rachel's stomach. Behind them, Ethan closed the last suitcase and zipped up the duffel. His movements were precise, almost too precise, like a man avoiding noise to avoid thought. Rachel glanced at the countertop where Sophie had placed a small paper bag, decorated with crayon stars and glitter. Inside, cushioned with tissue, lay a delicate felt ornament. A reindeer with lopsided antlers and Sophie's name stitched unevenly in red thread. To Grandma and Grandpa, Sophie had written on the tag. Rachel tried to smile. "We'll keep it safe for the tree, sweetheart." Sophie beamed, eyes wide with expectation. "Do you think they'll hang mine this year?" Rachel's throat caught. She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Last year, Margaret had accidentally left Sophie's name off the family photo card. Rachel had let it slide then. Maybe because she still wanted to believe it wasn't intentional. Maybe because she didn't want to start a fight on Christmas. Not this time. She turned to Ethan instead. "Did your mom say anything about Sophie's gift on the call last week?" Ethan didn't meet her eyes. "She was busy. You know how she gets with planning." Rachel did know. Margaret Bennett was always too busy to acknowledge what didn't serve her curated image of family perfection. "Right," Rachel murmured. The car ride was silent except for the occasional scratch of Sophie's mitten against the window as she traced snowflakes. As they neared the familiar road leading into the Bennett's part of town, Rachel's chest tightened. They passed Jonathan's house first, Ethan's older brother. Warm lights spilled from the windows, a wreath hung perfectly centered on the door, and children's laughter floated from the backyard. Rachel saw their daughter's cousins darting between snowmen and candy cane stakes. Even the mailbox had a ribbon on it. Sophie pointed. "Are we going to Uncle Jonathan's first?" Rachel forced a cheerful tone. "No, honey, we're going to Grandma and Grandpa's, but we'll see them later tonight, remember?" Sophie nodded and hugged the paper bag to her chest. They pulled into the long circular driveway of the Bennett estate. The snow had been perfectly shoveled, of course. The hedges, trimmed within an inch of their lives, sparkled under delicate strands of golden lights. Rachel's eyes flicked up to the grand windows. Through the glass, she could already see it. The Christmas tree. A towering pine reaching nearly to the ceiling, drenched in pristine white and gold. Garlands cascaded like ribbons, every ornament perfectly symmetrical. No handmade reindeer, no child's glitter glue mess. It looked like something from a showroom. As they stepped inside, the warmth hit them instantly, along with the faint scent of pine and whatever expensive candle Margaret had decided matched the theme this year. Margaret herself was nowhere to be seen. Richard came to greet them, polite, stiff. He patted Sophie's head, said, "Merry Christmas, Pumpkin," and turned to Ethan. Rachel couldn't help noticing. No glance toward her. No mention of the drive. No, "How was the trip?" Nothing. Sophie clutched the ornament bag. Her eyes had found the tree. She stood there for a beat too long, just staring. Rachel followed her gaze. There was no space left, not even a bare branch at the back. She looked at Ethan, but he was already talking to Richard about parking arrangements. Like the tree wasn't even there. Like none of this was happening. Sophie quietly put her ornament back into her coat pocket. When Sophie's name wasn't called during gift time, the room fell silent. Rachel's heart did not. The fire in the Bennett fireplace flickered with practiced elegance, just enough flame to warm the mahogany-paneled room, not enough to melt anything real. A mountain of perfectly wrapped boxes had been arranged like a display, ribbons curled, tags glittering, paper matching the decor. Margaret sat regally at one end of the room, legs crossed, flute of champagne in hand. Her smile was crisp. Rachel had seen photographs of museum curators less careful with their collections than Margaret was with this moment. It was, after all, her tradition. One by one, the names were read aloud. Jonathan stood next to the tree, handing presents to the children, calling names with theatrical glee. "April!" he cheered. His daughter squealed, "Connor! Emma!" The little ones tore into their gifts as paper rustled like leaves in a storm. Laughter rose in waves. Claire snapped photos. Richard chuckled. The room glowed with polished perfection. Rachel sat next to Sophie on the edge of the velvet settee. Sophie's hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her ornament was still in her coat pocket upstairs. Her hair had come slightly undone, a red bow now drooping toward her ear. She waited, eyes wide, knees swinging. Rachel didn't breathe. Jonathan read another name, and another. The pile dwindled. April looked over at Sophie, puzzled. She whispered something to her cousin and cast a confused glance at Margaret, who was now sipping her champagne, her gaze cool and evasive. Still no Sophie. Rachel's fingers closed around her daughter's hand. Sophie leaned in and whispered, "Maybe they forgot. Maybe Santa got lost." Rachel blinked, hard, once, twice. She opened her mouth. To say what? That Santa doesn't forget? That grown-ups don't weaponize affection? That this wasn't cruel, just careless? But she knew, and Sophie knew too. The final gift was handed out. Jonathan stepped back and clapped. "All right, that's everything." Silence. Then a smattering of applause. Kids tore into their toys, but not Sophie. Rachel looked at Ethan. He hadn't moved. His elbows were resting on his knees, eyes shut like he was bracing against an invisible tide. Sophie's eyes welled. A small, trembling breath escaped her. Rachel saw her jaw tighten the way kids try to hold in something too big for them. The glittery lights blurred in Rachel's vision. April, bless her, crawled across the rug and handed Sophie a crumpled piece of red wrapping paper. "Here, you can have this. It's shiny." Rachel's heart cracked down the middle. She stood, gently pulling Sophie up by the hand. "We're going to get some air." No one stopped them. No one asked. They walked through the silent hallway and up the stairs, Sophie's small footsteps echoing faintly on the polished wood. In the guest room, Rachel helped her change into pajamas, brushing knots from her hair as gently as she could. Sophie crawled under the blanket, pulling it tight to her chin. Her stuffed bunny, Mr. Nibbles, peeked out from under the covers. Rachel smoothed the edge of the blanket, tucking it in like she used to when Sophie was younger. The girl was quiet, but Rachel knew what silence meant. It wasn't peace. It was containment. Then Sophie turned her head and asked, voice small, unsure, "Is love something I have to earn, Mom?" They thought the silence would continue. Ethan brought an envelope that shattered it. Christmas morning had a strange weight to it, like a storm that had already passed but left everything damp and unsteady. The Bennett estate gleamed in polite tradition. Cinnamon rolls, quiches, and flutes of mimosa sat untouched on fine porcelain. Rachel noticed how no one mentioned the gift exchange from the night before. As if by some unspoken pact, they had all decided to pretend. Sophie played upstairs with April, her laughter distant and faint through the ornate ceiling vents. Rachel sat across from Margaret at the dining table, her posture a study in poise. But her eyes drifted toward Ethan, who hadn't touched his plate. Richard refilled his champagne and cleared his throat. "So, Margaret," he began casually, "should we start looking at chalets for next year's ski trip? I imagine Jonathan can work out the logistics for flights." Margaret smiled thinly. "It'll be good to have the whole family together. We missed that this year." The word whole landed like a brick. Rachel turned to Ethan, expecting his usual glance. Maybe weary, maybe tight-lipped. But instead, he reached slowly into his coat pocket, pulled out a thick white envelope, and placed it on the table with a soft thud. A silence, this time not born of neglect but of anticipation, settled across the room. "I've made some changes," Ethan said, his voice steady. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. Claire looked at Rachel, confused. Ethan opened the envelope. One by one, he laid out the papers with deliberate care. The room held its breath. "The first," he said, "is the establishment of a trust fund under Sophie's name. It's funded independently, irrevocable, and entirely separated from Bennett family accounts." Margaret's eyebrows twitched. She opened her mouth, but Ethan raised a second document. "The second is a declaration of withdrawal. Effective immediately, I'm divesting from all Bennett estate joint ventures, real estate holdings, family shares, discretionary trusts, all of it." Richard laughed sharply. "Are you serious?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Completely." Jonathan's mouth hung open. Claire whispered something to him that Rachel couldn't catch. Rachel's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She hadn't seen this coming. Not like this. She thought of the late nights Ethan had spent in the garage with the door shut, phone calls muffled behind its walls. She'd assumed it was work stress. Maybe it was. But the work wasn't for them. It was for Sophie. "And the third," Ethan continued, pulling out the final sheet, "is a notarized letter. It affirms Rachel and I as autonomous from any future family financial planning. Our daughter's name will never again be excluded, by mistake or by design." Margaret's lips parted. Nothing came out. Richard's face darkened, then reddened. "So this is some performance? You want applause?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "I want my daughter to stop questioning whether she matters. I want her to grow up knowing her worth isn't conditional on proximity to your tree or your table." He looked straight at Margaret. "Our daughter will never wonder again if she's invisible." No one responded. Not with words. Only the soft tick of the antique clock on the mantel dared to interrupt. Ethan stood. Rachel followed. She gathered her coat, the same one Sophie's ornament still sat inside. No one stopped them. Again. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, slow and silent. The car waited at the edge of the driveway. Sophie's giggles echoed faintly through an upstairs window. As they walked toward the car, Rachel whispered, "How long have you been planning this?" Ethan replied, "Since the last time they made her cry. I thought we'd left the worst behind, until I opened Sophie's drawer and saw what she'd been drawing. The house in Denver felt colder than usual, despite the heater humming softly through the vents." Rachel wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched in an hour. Outside, the world was still white, still beautiful. But here, in the quiet, beauty felt irrelevant. Sophie had barely spoken since they got home. She'd unpacked her things with a quiet that didn't suit an 8-year-old. Her glitter shoes still sat by the door. Mr. Nibbles had been placed carefully back on her bed. She ate half a bowl of cereal the morning after they returned, nodded when Rachel offered a hug, then disappeared into her room with no protests, no bouncing, no noise. It wasn't normal. Rachel had told herself maybe Sophie just needed time, a few days to forget, to breathe. But 2 days later, while folding laundry, Rachel noticed the corner of a sketch pad sticking out from under Sophie's pillow. Not the one for school, a smaller one. Something private. She hesitated, then gently slid it out. The first drawing showed a Christmas tree. 5 kids stood around it, smiling, arms outstretched as they opened presents. In the corner, separated by a line of blue crayon snow, was a tiny figure, a girl with yellow hair and no gift. The smile on her face was crooked, as if drawn by a hesitant hand, as if the artist wasn't sure if she should smile at all. Rachel turned the page. Another scene, a table full of cookies. Everyone had a plate. The same girl, again in the corner, had none. Another page. Another party. Another corner. The girl never changed, but the colors faded. Her smile grew smaller. Rachel's throat tightened. That night, as the sky outside turned deep indigo and the city lights blinked to life, Rachel opened her laptop and found an email waiting. Subject: Concern re Sophie. It was from Ms. Monroe, Sophie's teacher. Rachel clicked. Hi, Rachel. I hope your family had a peaceful holiday. I wanted to reach out regarding something Sophie shared with me before winter break. We were working on a writing exercise about traditions. She didn't want to write. When I asked why, she said quietly, "If someone forgets you every year, does it mean you don't matter?" I gently asked what she meant. She didn't elaborate, but I wanted you to know. She's a bright, sweet girl, and she matters very much. Warmly, Ms. Monroe Rachel stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. Then she stood up, walked down the hallway, and found Ethan sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine he clearly wasn't reading. She dropped the sketchbook and the laptop in front of him. He read silently. When he finished, she said just one sentence. "I'm done hoping they'll change." Ethan looked at her. Not surprised, not even sad. Just ready. She opened the hallway closet and pulled out the cedar box where they kept old family items. Wedding photos, baby cards, a holiday card from 2 years ago, the one where Margaret had cropped Rachel's shoulder out of the family photo, but still used it anyway. Rachel took it all outside. The snow had frozen into crusty layers along the patio. She lit a match. The flame caught slowly. Paper curled, faces disappeared. Inside, she drafted an official letter. Not angry, just final. She worded it carefully, severing ties, refusing future contact, outlining legal clarity. No more visits, no more holidays, no more silent wounds passed down to Sophie. She printed it, her hand shaking just once. Ethan stepped into the room, saw the letter, picked up the pen. Without hesitation, he replied, "I'll sign it first." The morning light in Colorado felt different. It didn't ask me to prove I belonged. It filtered gently through the tall pine trees, casting soft golden stripes across the wooden floor of the new cabin. The frost on the windows shimmered like the inside of a snow globe, and somewhere nearby, a hawk called out into the crisp silence. Rachel stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, watching Sophie tie her scarf. The girl's cheeks were already flushed with anticipation. Outside, snow blanketed the hillside, still pristine where no footsteps had yet pressed into it. "Gloves?" Rachel asked. Sophie held them up with a grin. Double-layered. "You said Estes morning's bite." Rachel smiled. The nickname Ethan had given this new chapter, Estes, had stuck. A cabin with sloped ceilings, a wood-burning fireplace, and just enough creaks in the floorboards to remind you that time was passing. Ethan stepped out of the bedroom, hair slightly tousled, still tucking in his flannel. "You two heading out?" "Just the short walk," Rachel said. "Art school drop-off, grocery run, then we're all home before dark." He reached out and gave Sophie's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Make something messy today." Sophie beamed. The art school was nestled behind a line of evergreens. No sign, just a turquoise door and windows lined with watercolor paintings from previous students. Ms. Green, a retired illustrator with a voice like chamomile tea, opened the door as they approached. "Well, good morning, Miss Bennett," she sang. "Back to claim the easels?" Sophie giggled and darted inside. Rachel watched as her daughter slipped off her boots and joined a circle of kids already dipping brushes into jars of color. Outside the school, the wind was soft and dry. The grocery store was small and local, with shelves labeled in chalk and a produce aisle that always smelled faintly of pine. As Rachel reached for a bunch of apples, a woman beside her glanced at the paper list in Rachel's hand. "Did a little one draw those?" she asked, pointing at the doodles. Rachel looked down. The shopping list was filled with Sophie's sketches: a carrot with a cape, a loaf of bread dancing, a snowflake wearing sunglasses. "Yes," Rachel said, smiling. "She has her own visual system." "She's got talent," the woman replied. "Don't lose those. That's joy on paper." Rachel folded the list carefully into her coat pocket. That night, as dusk melted into evening, the family of three gathered in front of their modest but fragrant spruce tree. It wasn't tall or professionally lit. The ornaments were mismatched: a knitted mitten, a pine cone with glitter, a clay fox Ethan had made as a child, and at the very top, placed with great ceremony by Sophie herself, was the ornament she'd made that year. A yellow paper star, trimmed in gold ribbon with her name written in bold, uneven letters. It caught the light and held it. Sophie stepped back and studied the tree. "Do you think I can invite Ms. Monroe to visit sometime?" Rachel looked at her, warmth rising in her chest. "Yes, I think she'd love that." Sophie leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think this is the first Christmas I actually remember." The Bennett envelope arrived a year later, but this time I was ready, with one of my own. It was a Thursday morning in December. Snow was just beginning to fall. Fat, slow flakes drifting past the kitchen window, melting softly against the glass. The same counter where Rachel once stood in silence now held cookie tins, Sophie's art supplies, and a pine-scented candle flickering in the corner. Rachel found the envelope between a utility bill and a holiday catalog. Her name, in Margaret's looping cursive, sat alone on the front. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she placed it on the dining table and watched as Sophie, sitting nearby, added the final brushstrokes to a watercolor. The girl was humming, a tune Rachel didn't recognize, likely one she'd made up herself. "Something special today?" Ethan asked, stepping into the kitchen and kissing Rachel's temple. She held up the envelope without comment. He nodded once, understanding immediately. Later, when the house was still and Sophie had gone out to play in the snow with the neighbor's dog, Rachel finally opened it. Margaret's letter was short, polished, evasive, and as brittle as ever. "We hope the past can remain the past. The family would love to see you all again. Perhaps this holiday season offers a chance to reconnect." No apology, no mention of Sophie. Just a vague suggestion of togetherness. Rachel read it twice. Then, she walked to the filing cabinet and pulled out 3 items. First, she printed the email from Ms. Monroe, the one that had torn her heart wide open 12 months earlier. Next, she scanned Sophie's drawing. The little girl in the corner, giftless, forgotten. And last, she selected a photo from her phone, one taken just last week. It showed their modest tree glowing in the cabin living room, with Sophie standing tall beside it, placing her handmade star at the top. Her smile in that moment was unforced, unguarded, genuine. Rachel sat at her desk and took out a blank card. She wrote one line in pen so firm the ink pressed through the paper. "This is what love looks like when it doesn't come with conditions." She placed all 4 items, the card, the photo, the scan, and the email, into a fresh envelope. No return address. She sealed it. Then, pulling on her boots and scarf, she walked outside. The snow had thickened, lining the street in soft white. Each step left a clear mark as she made her way to the mailbox at the end of the drive. As she opened the lid and let the envelope slip from her fingers, Rachel smiled. Not because she won, but because Sophie no longer needs to. Inside the house, warm and golden in the late afternoon light, Sophie leaned over her painting. Her brush moved slowly, purposefully. A warm kitchen, a tall pine tree, 3 figures beneath it, standing close. No one missing. There was a time when silence meant being overlooked, but now it means peace. The kind earned, not granted. Justice didn't arrive with grand speeches or slammed doors, but with a quiet envelope and a child's smile no longer forced. When injustice is met with quiet resolve, Even the loudest cruelty begins to fade. Like a snowflake resting where no one can crush it, love found its place and stayed.